Hello guys, good evening everyone. So good evening IAS aspirants and specifically the students who are preparing for IAS through IAS Law Optional. And more specifically, if you guys are, obviously you must be covering in GS paper about international relations, and in IAS Law Optional there is a subject called international law. Over there, this particular topic, this Russian-Ukraine conflict, the future of international law, or should I say past, present and future of international law, that will be more appropriate actually. So what exactly we are going to discuss in this particular session, and why this session actually? If you observe the previous year pattern of the UPSC, they are more concerned with the latest contemporary developments which are happening across this world. So obviously you should be very well aware about this, the latest updates, whatever is happening in a particular field. In this particular domain, there are four main factors actually, which have just happened recently. And then, you can understand, if you try to relate the current affairs in any topic, then you can understand the relevance of that particular topic as well. Like for example, recently, four things have taken place. Actually on Feb 24, on the current, you can say on the coming week, this will be the first anniversary of this Russian-Ukraine conflict. So you can understand that from examination perspective, this particular topic is absolutely important for all of you. Number one. So first anniversary. No one has expected that this particular Ukraine and Russia conflict will take so much of time. And still, no one is basically perceiving, what will be the ultimate outcome of this particular conflict. Number one. Second, in the last November 2022, Ukraine has given 10-point peace plan, which was outrightly rejected by the Russia. So this is also one of the point actually, we should discuss in this particular aspect. Another thing, the latest development which has just taken place only few days ago, 2-3 days ago only. One Semar Harsh, the reporter actually, he had published a report about the Nord Stream pipeline. I hope all of you must have heard about this particular report. And in this report, he has concluded, actually, what he has, disclosed, that this particular Nord Stream pipeline of the Russia, regarding this energy supply to Germany and the other European countries as well, was blasted by America intentionally. And what was the reason behind that? I will discuss with you. We will come to that point as well. And last, the role of India in light of the G20 and the lessons learned. Because nowadays, you must be seeing that, a lot of persons are basically discussing about that India can play a role of mediator to resolve this particular conflict. So in such a way, it becomes very crucial if you go by these four main contemporary developments in this particular field, you can understand what actually is happening across this world. And these 4 points make this particular topic most crucial one. So we will accordingly discuss about this particular Russia and Ukraine conflict, and then we will discuss in various parts what actually can happen. Like for example, as I mentioned you, on Feb 24, it will be the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine. Last year, on 24th of Feb 2022, Russian president had initiated this war, and since that day, this is an approximate figure actually, more than 18,000 civilian casualties. This is one of the main crucial point in our discussion actually, because lot of countries are basically alleging that Russia has basically, breached or they have violated the norms of international law, and more specifically the war crimes, and more specifically violation of international humanitarian law. This is one of the main point actually. And as many as 8 million Ukraine citizens have been forced to evacuate. So what we can say, recently, after passing of this 1 year, still we are not basically seeing any kind of update or any kind of, the solution to this particular war actually. Now moving towards the next point. Ukraine 10 piece formula. This 10 point peace plan actually. So I have just mentioned few points over here. All of you must have gone through this. So, I'm not going to basically delve into this particular aspect because this has been, or I should say, Ukraine has just given this, this 10-point peace plan as per its own choice or as per its own requirement actually. But the reasonable apprehension in the minds of Russia, that has not been taken care of actually. And to understand this particular point, we have to go back to the historical context of this Russian-Ukraine conflict. So I will take you to that particular point. So without going into this particular 10-point peace plan, so you can just go through this and I will come back to this point later on, okay? Now, one of the main issue in this particular conflict is basically highlighted by the Seymour Hersh. And this person has basically, disclosed what actually USA is planning. If you see, this report is actually saying 2 points. Number one, that, the NATO military escalation against Russia and Ukraine. What is the ultimate purpose? Why USA was involved into this, planting the bombs to, this, demolish this particular pipeline? The reason was, it would help fuel more anti-Russian, it will help fuel more anti-Russian propaganda. Because, the main issue in any kind of international relation is not about the requirements of any nation. It is about the ideological war. Ideology matters a lot. So ideological war is one of the biggest concern which we should take care of actually. Okay, another point which one should focus upon is, there is one saying that there are no friends, no enemies, only mutual interest. Another main finding of this report is actually by making Europe more dependent on US natural gas imports to replace Russian gas, it corresponded to a major US aim in the Ukraine war from the outset. To bring Europe more firmly under the US control, these aims have increasingly come to open in recent years. So if we go by this report, and this person is not, like any kind of Tom, Dick and Harry, this person is having credibility actually in the market. So this particular reporter, he has, mentioned in his report that the ultimate objective of USA was basically, ultimately Europe is dependent upon Russia for this energy requirements. And USA was very firm that, Ukraine should come and merge into NATO. This is one of the biggest issue. I will come to this point as well. If we can, ultimately all the time, basically we use a word called sovereignty, territorial integrity. But when there is a, lot of casualties are happening in this world, and because of this Ukraine issue, there is a global kind of, you can say, food scarcity as well. So can't we figure out any kind of, the solution for the time being, and then we can have a discussion. But just, leaving the civilians and the other persons in the mid of the war doesn't make any sense actually. So if by promising that, by the Ukraine actually, if I will not go and I will not, join this NATO, and if this could have avoided the war, this would be a better solution. But it will, you might be saying that it will be a win-win situation for Russia, or Russia will be like becoming adamant. No. Russia is having only one concern, that NATO is basically approaching to the boundaries or to the doors of Russia. And this is a, you can say, serious kind of risk for Russia. So if this war could have been avoided, so that could have been done actually. But what is the, what is solution right now, that I will discuss with you. So if you go by this particular report, I advise all of you, please read this report of Seymour Hersh. It will be an eye-opener for all of you as well, that how the interest of USA is basically causing a war kind of situation in Europe or in Russia or in some other countries as well. Because it is the USA who is involved and who was involved in the past as well into many of such kind of wars actually. Now, moving towards next point, the historical context. If you are an IAS aspirant, obviously you must be very well aware what is, this historical context of this Russia and Ukraine conflict. But if you are new to this particular point, I will just give a brief explanation. Actually, what happened, Ukraine and Russia basically, they have, you can say, over 6 lakh square kilometer area and more than 40 million population. And Ukraine is basically by the size is the second largest country by area and the eighth populace in Europe actually. And Ukraine is bordered by Russia in the east, Belarus in the north, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova in the west. When you go by the geography, it becomes very important to understand how exactly the things are being decided through the use of geography as well, because geography matters a lot. Then it also has a maritime boundary with the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. This Black Sea, this is also one of the biggest factor for which basically Russia is taking an aim towards Ukraine. And that was one of the reason as well when in 2014 Russia went with, you can say, annexation of Crimea as well. So basically Ukraine was subject to, you can say, different rules actually, like Ottoman Empire, then Russian Empire, then Soviet Union. And in 1991, after the disintegration of USSR, Ukraine become an independent country. But still, the things were actually in favor of Russia. And there was a kind of orange revolution of 2004 actually, whereby in the 2004 presidential election in Ukraine, a series of protests and the civil unrest occurred in the country, which we call basically Orange Revolution. Actually, the party name was actually Orange, and that is the reason it is named as an Orange Revolution. So the corruption and the malpractice, there were charges of corruption and malpractices in voting alleged by the protesters, and it was held by the Supreme Court of Ukraine as well, and the court annulled this election process in Ukraine. And finally, the Viktor Yushchenko was declared as the winner of this particular re-election, and the theme of this particular party was actually orange, and actually we call this Orange Revolution. So now this person, now what we can say, now this person is basically ruling Ukraine, and he was pro-Russian actually, he was pro-Russian. But after some time in 2014, the country was actually once again into this, you can say, the issue of once again the same kind of, the political unrest actually. And finally what happened, another person came to power, and the name of that person was Petro Poroshenko. And he took over as the president of Ukraine. And he was actually pro-American. So now you can see that this particular person, Viktor, was pro-Russian, while the change in the government in 2014, this was a pro-American government actually. So ultimately, the war is not about, you can say, any serious kind of thing. It is actually a kind of, ideological war. That is the main point actually. Okay. So now coming to another point, what happened after that actually? That is the main point. So in 2014, because Crimea was one of the main, you can say, geographically, it was a main strategic point for Russia as well. So, and Russia, this Crimea is basically having a lot of ethnic Russians and Ukrainians as well, and Crimeans as well. And basically what happened in 18th century, Crimea was annexed by the Russian Empire. And after this Russian Revolution in Russia, Crimea became an autonomous region in the Soviet Union. Finally, the things were happening, and finally in 2014, because, in this particular area of Crimea actually, you can say over here, the post-Ukrainian revolution in 2014, when the pro-American government came into power, the Russian troops were deployed in Crimea. And because, this particular, you can say, Crimea is having more than 90% population, which are Russians actually. So they basically, they were in favor of joining Russia. And ultimately things went into favor of Russia, and Russia took over the control of Crimea at that particular time. One of the demand of this Zelensky in this 10-point peace plan is, about Crimea as well. So he was basically asking that, even from this particular moment onwards, Ukraine is of the view that Crimea is a part of Ukraine only. But Russia says, no, it is not your part. And even actually in 2014, the areas adjacent to the, this Crimea were actually, controlled by the, you can say the persons or the supporters of Russia. So what happened after this now? What happened? Now, this war was going on, and in 2014, there was an agreement. Agreement was basically between Russia and Ukraine. And this agreement basically we call the Minsk Agreement. So basically what happened, Please read this point actually carefully. After 2014, in Ukraine revolution, you can say, whereby the pro-American government came into power and the Euromaidan movement actually, the civil unrest erupted in the Donetsk and the Luhansk regions actually, which are the main central point of this current conflict as well, in these two areas actually. So basically we call together these two areas as the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine actually, and which have the borders with Russia. And I will be coming to the conclusion, and you will be will be able to relate why I am focusing upon this particular the borders with Russia. This is having an importance actually, because if you observe the kind of diplomacy which is happening in this Russia and Ukraine, many experts are of the view. I am giving you the concluding remarks, but please don't use right now these concluding remarks in this discussion right now. Take it for the last kind of the PPT only. Last slide I will discuss with you. I'm just giving you an idea only. The idea is there are a lot of experts who are of the view that the situation of this Russian-Ukraine conflict will end. Either there will be a partition, or there will be a, you can say, partition of this Ukraine into east and west kind of Ukraine actually, like what happened in Germany or what happened with Korea. If it is a case of like Germany, then obviously what will happen, the area which will go with the west, that will prosper like Germany, the West Germany, and the area which remains with USSR, East Germany, the same thing will happen with the East Ukraine as well. Few of the experts are of the view, and someone are saying that it might end with the bifurcation like Korea, the North Korea, South Korea, whereby the situation is still basically, you can say, a war kind of situation can happen at any moment of time. So what should be the solution for that? So I will be coming to that point, but before this, just focus upon this point right now. So what happened over here? In this case, after 2014, in the Minsk, basically it is a, you can say, Minsk is the capital of Belarus. Okay, so thereby, Ukraine and Russia, they had some kind of deliberations about the solution to this war. And finally, what happened? There was a Minsk I agreement actually, but ultimately, this particular agreement was, was not successful because both parties actually, they have committed some violations, and ultimately Minsk I agreement was not successful. Later on, what happened in Minsk II agreement, you can say, representatives of Russia, Ukraine, and one organization. I will be discussing with you this particular point later on. OSCE, please mark it. So the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This is one of the point actually, OSCE. I will be giving an idea what is this OSCE actually. So, and the leaders of separatist held regions in Donetsk and the Luhansk signed a 13-point agreement in Feb 2015. And the leaders of other European nations as well, France and Germany, they also met actually. But anyhow, this was also not, you can say, conclusive. There was a lot of kind of conflicts were going on between Russia and Ukraine. But anyhow, this was a kind of temporary arrangement. So by looking at this particular point, what we can say, dialogue is the only solution for any kind of conflict. Otherwise, war will keep on going on. That is the biggest issue. Because what is happening right now, Russia is basically in the same dilemma like what happened with USA in Vietnam War. Same kind of situation Russia is basically facing. So now it has become a question of, the supremacy. So Putin is not in a position to leave Ukraine as it is, because now ultimately, bhai, इज्जत, respect का मुद्दा बन गया है भैया आपका ये. It is a question of your reputation now. Same thing is with, you can say, Ukraine. Now Ukraine is basically considering, if we sacrifice or we surrender, then ultimately, what will happen with our value. So ultimately, we are also the champions. So ultimately, now it is not a case of only simple conflict actually. It is the matter of, you can say, Kaurav and Pandav kind of war actually. So ultimately, decide क्या होना, धर्म जिसके साथ है, अब किसके साथ है ये, international law में no one can conclude actually. But ultimately, in this Mahabharata, solution should be there. But if some kind of, Krishna enters into this domain to resolve this dispute, which India can do actually, which India can perform its duty during this G20 meet now, because now we are having the presidency of G20. I will be discussing that point with you as well after some time. But before this, just get an idea about the historical context. So if you are very well aware about the historical context, it will make you, knowledgeable to understand the nuances of this war actually. So the war is basically about, now the war is basically about the reputation. Because Russia is also having some kind of, you can say, the kind of ego actually. So basically we call this Vietnam syndrome actually. Vietnam syndrome. So you can also quote these kind of points in your answers. Now coming to the another point. The deal 13 points were in this Minsk II agreement. I have mentioned this in my PPT. You can have a look at that. But it is not for the point of discussion. I have just mentioned over here so that you can get an idea what exactly are those points at that in 2015 actually. Moving to next point. Now the main agenda of this live session is basically to discuss with you the international law perspective, and more specifically public international law, because ultimately it is only the domain of public international law. So what are the major topics which are concerned over here? I have just mentioned the quote of this Putin over here, and in this statement we will try to figure out the grounds upon which Russia is claiming that we are correct, and we will try to analyze them from the international law perspective, whether these arguments of Russia are correct or not. Because now it is the point of, it is the, the idea of international law. So over here, what we can say, number one, on 24th of Feb 2022, Vladimir Putin has said that to carry out a special military operation in Ukraine, now please pay attention, to protect people, number one, to protect people who have been facing humiliation and genocide. This is one of the points perpetrated by the Kiev regime. So it is the one of the main ground actually mentioned by Putin in his speech when he officially declared attack upon Ukraine. This was one of the main agenda, and there are further few other points as well I will discuss with you now. So actually what happened, how this statement is concerned with this public international law, we will pay attention over here now. Now coming to this international law perspective, number one, this is one of the main point for the IAS law optional aspirants actually. Over here, main point is actually, and this is one of the question actually, in international law there is a question called the importance of UN Charter, and then the relevance of UN Charter in this current scenario, and whether UN Charter or whether the, one of the question is basically whether international law is a law or not. Because in UPSC law optional, this is the one permanent question which is being asked by the UPSC every time. Okay, so what actually happens over here? Now please pay attention. Under the contemporary in public international law, the use of force is clearly prohibited. But there are some narrow exceptions actually, and Russia is taking a benefit of those exceptions. And how these exceptions are applicable? The prohibition is enshrined in Article 2(4) of the UN Charter. So this Article 2, Para 4 of UN Charter, and the main is basically, international law is based upon some kind of, treaties, some kind of binding obligations, and some kind of customary international laws as well. So as a practice of customary international law as well, use of force is actually prohibited unless and until there are, some kind of, emergency situation is there. Otherwise, use of force is clearly prohibited. So basically, it is being said in Article 2, Para 4 that, and it is also part of this just cogence, or generally, it is being pronunciated as just cogence actually. But ultimately, you can say it is a concept of, for simplicity, it is just cogence actually, which is we call pre-emptory norms. Like you cannot derogate from the pre-emptory norms which are essential for the survival of the human being. Okay. So the UN Charter has basically given some kind of exceptions, like one of the exception is given in Article 42 of UN Charter, whereby UN Security Council has the power to take action. And then there is a Article 51 actually, which is being used by the Russia right now in the name of self-defense actually. Self-defense. This self-defense is actually, for the simplicity purpose, I'm telling you, you can simply relate this right of self-defense in the same context when we read right of private defense in Indian Penal Code. It is actually same kind of concept. The same kind of provisions applicable in right of private defense are applicable over here. I will be discussing now Article 51 with you because it is not an act of UN Security Council, obviously. It is an act of Russia only. So Russia is basically saying that there was an imminent danger upon our territory, and according to that Article 51, we are using individual and collective self-defense. And now in this individual and the collective self-defense, I will be discussing with you another subtopics of public international law. And this is one of the questions which you can see in the exam. What is the concept of self-defense in international law? This is also one of the relevant question over here. Now, justification number 1 given by Russia. Justification number 1. Here Russia is saying that it is a case of individual self-defense under Article 51. So the main contention of Russia from the very beginning is basically, from the very beginning, Russia is saying that joining of NATO by the Ukraine will cause serious kind of injury to the interest of Russia. So basically this Russia sees or perceives it is a threat. If NATO is basically coming to the doors of Russia, they are perceiving that it will obviously create some kind of troubles for Russia. As I mentioned you, in case of international scenario, actually the wars are ideological wars. So Russia is basically having the kind of, the kind of economic concept actually, and the kind of capitalism and the kind of the ideological war of capitalism versus communism, you can say, or the socialism. Okay. So the main contention of Russia is basically that we want to defend ourselves from this NATO. And NATO is basically kind of, very well, it is a kind of basically military organization of USA and other European nations actually. And in the garb of, giving the help and protection, Ukraine was said by the USA that if you join NATO, we will help you out. But till date, 1 year is going to conclude on this 24th of Feb. Still, Ukraine has not been joined in NATO. Because the main issue is if Ukraine has been allowed to join NATO, then ultimately NATO has to stand with Ukraine and they have to, enter into this war. And ultimately everyone is very well aware, Russia is also a nuclear power state. Please mind it, guys, it is a nuclear power which has avoided the Third World War. If nuclear power would not have been there, ultimately Third World War would have taken place. Please mind it. If anyone says that it is the effectiveness of UN Charter or the ICJ or ICC, please believe me, all developed countries has basically misused all these international organizations. The ultimate power is basically this nuclear power. And that is one of the reasons why even China is basically not coming, upfront to India to wage any kind of war. Otherwise, war would have taken place. But now they are very well aware, if they take any kind of action, India is nuclear powered. And that is one of the lessons actually we should learn. The USA and the other European nations are not allowing Ukraine to join NATO. Otherwise, what is the promise given by them earlier? The promise was that you please come to join NATO and we will help you out. But still, till date, there is no solution or no joining of Ukraine into NATO. So ultimately, what is happening and what has happened actually, because, this USA is a biggest mastermind actually. And in the garb of this war actually, USA is fulfilling its twin or, multiple objectives. One of the objective is USA has become the biggest energy supplier. And second is the weapon supply. And the weapon supply, ultimately, you can say it ultimately benefiting you economically. The USA actually, not the other countries. Please mind it. Now, so question is whether self-defense by Russia is allowed or not, whether it is okay or not. Russia has followed all parameters of Article 51. They have notified the UN Security Council because it is one of the conditions that you have to notify the UN Security Council if you are taking the help of Article 51. So on the very same day, on the 24th of Feb, Russia had notified UN Security Council that we are waging war because of there is an imminent danger or risk upon our territory. Okay, but the point is self-defense. Now it is a critique of this argument of Russia. Self-defense can be used only when there is a kind of actual or ongoing armed attack, or there is a complete reasonable apprehension, yes, attack is going to happen, only by the direct victim of that attack actually, or otherwise. And the main element is what when I was saying it is same like right of private defense. The idea is the self-defense should be used. The self-defense should be used as per necessity and proportionality. You know very well, this was laid down in the Caroline test, that the use of self-defense should be as a defense only. You cannot use this as an attack actually. So basically, it should be necessary and it should be proportionate only. Otherwise, it will be a breach of UN Charter. So whatever we are seeing in the opening statement of this presentation, I mentioned you, more than 18,000 casualties of civilians is one of the point whereby we should understand that this is not a case of self-defense actually. Now moving towards another point. Now in this justification number 1 by the Russia is a case of aggression as well. Aggression. Because as per aggression, the meaning of aggression, and it is a part of this syllabus as well, aggression is special topic actually. So this might come in the examination. So you should be, you should be very clear what is the meaning of aggression. Aggression means basically use of armed force by a state against the, now this is a line actually which you should mention in your answers, sovereignty, territorial integrity, or the political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the UN Charter. So without any doubt, what we can say that it is a case of actually, neither Ukraine or NATO was conducting an attack against Russia. ये तो बिल्कुल वैसे ही हुआ कि मेरे को सपना आया कि भैया मेरे पीछे कई लोग पड़े हुए हैं. So Russia was having some kind of dream actually that if NATO, Ukraine will join the NATO, there will be an imminent risk to me. So, ultimately, there are some kind of, bondage of Russia with Ukraine as well, and some kind of strategic importance. So this strategic importance is one of the main factor actually. So Russia might be thinking like what will happen after 50 or 100 years. And when Russia is a nuclear power state, then Russia, should have been, Russia should have avoided this particular war actually. Because if, Ukraine would have joined the NATO, then also there would not be some kind of great risk to the sovereignty of Russia. But ultimately, we know, these kind of Tanasha, these kind of autocrats actually, they can do, whatever they want to. So they don't pay any kind of heed to the general public actually. So whatever is happening in Russia due to economic sanctions and due to, all these kind of, difficulties of energy crisis in Europe. So ultimately, the burden is being faced by the public only. And finally, the legality of the self-defense against an uncommenced but an imminent armed attack is disputed. Because the main argument is, Russia is saying that it is a case of, you can say, anticipatory self-defense. It is a case of anticipatory self-defense. So whether it is a case of anticipatory self-defense or not, that is also one of the question. Because Russia is saying there is an apprehension that it might happen, but let it happen first. Then only you can take this kind of step. So ultimately, there was not any kind of standing army, or there was not any kind of intention of NATO to wage any war against Russia. It was only game of economic game actually. There is a saying, when goods do not enter, soldiers will. So please, mention this quote in your answer. It will give you the weightage. Ultimately, economic relations are the biggest thing. Na baap bada na bhaiya, sabse bada rupaiya. That is one of the main factor actually. Economic interests are the major interest which, are the supreme from any kind of interest. But anyhow, moving towards the next point now. So in the speech, now justification number 2. In the speech, Putin was of the view that the situation in Donbas region actually, which I mentioned you, we had to stop the atrocity, that genocide of the millions of the people who live there and who pinned their hopes on Russia. Actually, in the Minsk Agreement, this was one of the point actually of the Russia, that there should not be any kind of atrocities or genocide of the Ukrainian living in this particular Donbas region. But there are, every party, every side is saying that, Russia is saying that atrocities were going on. Ukraine is saying nothing was happening. So this is subject to dispute actually. But anyhow, so the collective self-defense is basically applicable only when you have some other states with you, some other states. So now Russia is saying that I have the other states with me. Like for example, Russia is saying the Luhansk and the Donetsk actually, they are the states now because I have recognized them as a state. So the another question which is important for all of you from the examination perspective is state. So the elements of statehood and then state recognition. So elements of statehood, when a state becomes a state, and finally what are the, what is the concept of recognition? What is the concept of recognition? Because in case of collective self-defense, more than one states are coming together. That is one of the point actually. So Russia is saying that I have other states with me and the other states are actually the east or the south regions of Ukraine only. So the main point over here is basically, the major point is, now see this one, Russia had recognized, please, highlight this point. Russia had recognized before launching an attack in the name of collective self-defense, Russia had recognized the Ukrainian provinces, Donetsk and the Luhansk as an independent state. Now the question is, what are the elements of statehood actually? So the elements are territory, population, then government, and then capacity to enter into the relations. Now the question is, okay, I agree that there is a territory, there is a population, but the question is, where is the government actually? Who is exercising effective control over that territory? That is the main element of international law. Effective control. Who is exercising the effective control? No one. And the ultimate control is in the hands of Ukraine only. So how you can recognize them unilaterally? So unilateral recognition doesn't make sense. And the main point is, if you see the another slide, which I just show you, because I have just, taken the elements which are important for all of you. So basically elements of statehood are required to be fulfilled, but the main issue is only, now see this slide actually, only Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Syria, South Ossetia and the Abkhazia, they only recognize the, separatist republics of Ukraine. Now the question is, these separate regions declared by Russia as a separate part, it doesn't make any sense, boss. So you cannot unilaterally declare that, they are now independent. So kal se tumhara naam ye, khatam baat. So it cannot happen actually. In international law, unless and until you follow or you adhere to the social contract theory, because social contract theory is the main foundation of this entire international law, you are bound by the social contract between the states actually. And if you will not fulfill this obligation, the society will turn into a chaotic society. So entire structure will be, khatam bhai, everything will be finished. It cannot happen unilaterally. Now, justification number 3. It is one of the main justification given by the Russia. The justification is basically humanitarian grounds. Humanitarian grounds. This is the justification given by Russia, and they are saying that, the persons living in this Donbas region actually, they are subject to genocide. They are subject to genocide. And we have a duty. We are duty bound actually to take action against the persons or against the country who are doing such kind of atrocities or the genocide actually. The concept of genocide is, you can say, an outcome of one principle called erga omnes. Erga omnes is basically a kind of, you can say, maxim in international law which says obligation for all. If any kind of crime against humanity is happening, then it is a responsibility of every nation to stop that particular crime. So Russia is basically taking a view that it is the responsibility of us, responsibility to protect, R2P. This is one of the biggest blunder actually which is happening right now. in the name of right to protect, right, or you can say this responsibility to protect, actually in the name of erga omnes, the this Russia is going on basically, such kind of actions. I'm not saying that Russia is at fault completely. No, it is not the case actually. Even USA and the other European nations are also at fault. But the main point is, if I weigh down the, the liability, then obviously, it goes against Russia. Russia is mainly responsible. It could have avoided the war, but ultimately this has not happened because of some kind of ideological differences. I can only say this. Okay. Now the point is, I was saying to you that I will tell you what is this OSCE. Please pay attention to this point actually. You will not find this mention in the books actually, because books, they only, they are outdated actually, and they do not mention all these points. So Russia's claim of genocide, it is one of the main conclusion actually of my discussion. Actually, since 2014, when this Minsk Agreement happened, there was a special monitoring mission to Ukraine, which we call SMM. Special monitoring mission to Ukraine under the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This society was there, set up by, you can say, Russia, Ukraine, and other European nations actually. So this committee is basically looking, this particular mission through this organization is looking about such kind of crimes happening in, or the genocide happening in the separatist regions of Ukraine. So now, what is the main element is, this report, this organization says, Russia's claim of genocide in Ukraine is a reprehensible falsehood. The SSM has complete access to the government-controlled areas of Ukraine and has never reported anything remotely resembling Russia's claim. So nothing kind of genocide has taken place in those areas. And basically, this report simply says that on the grounds of humanitarian grounds, intervention is not acceptable. This is one of the findings of this report actually. So I just mentioned what is this OSCE. So you will not find the mention of this OSCE anywhere. So please have a look on this. So this is an organization for security and the cooperation in Europe actually, is the world's largest security-oriented intergovernmental organization, in which around 57 countries are members actually. It is based in Vienna, and members are from Europe, Asia, North America, etc. However, India is not a member of this organization. The main working of this organization is basically to deal with the issues such as arms control, promotion of human rights, freedom of press, fair elections, and to monitor whether any crimes are happening against any person in that area or not. So eventually this organization is saying nothing is happening as such as claimed by Russia. So this is also one of the, you can say, conclusion which you can mention when you have to counter the arguments of Russia. So you have to just give a balanced approach. Now, obviously by going through this entire episode, entire saga, what we can say, whether international law is really a law or not. So now it is up to you. You can decide whether it is really a law or not. So it is up to you only. Basically, the instrumentalities of UN, the agencies of UN, ICJ, they are just helpless actually. Because of the biggest blunder is veto power. Because of the biggest blunder, that is veto power. We know very well, if UN Security Council takes any action against Russia, it is helpless. Because every resolution of UN Security Council should be passed by the, minimum 9 members out of total 15 members, and there should not be any negative vote by the permanent 5 members. And obviously China and Russia, because now both are cooperating with each other. So eventually nothing can happen from the UN Security Council. And ICJ is also, you can say, helpless because Russia is now not under the compulsory jurisdiction of ICJ. It has withdrawn itself from the compulsory jurisdiction of ICJ. And ultimately, so what we can say, so ICJ is basically, they have given provisional measures in favor of Ukraine, but ultimately nothing happened. So because Russia is simply saying ICJ, तुम हमारे लिए अप्लाई करती नहीं हो, हमारे लिए एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करती हो. So ICJ is also, helpless actually, because ultimately whatever kind of action ICJ suggests, it has to go to UN Security Council. So once again, we will come to the square zero. Then comes Another kind of, the provisional measures, basically you can refer Article 41 and Article 41 clause 1 and clause 2, whereby, the notice has been given to the parties and to the UN Security Council as well. But because of the veto power, the biggest blunder actually, nothing is happening. Even the Article 94 of UN Charter, okay, which has to basically compel the states, but eventually, once again, veto power. So even when question comes about the veto power in the examination, you can relate that case with this Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. Now, international law violations under UN Charter. So what are the basically, the rules which are being violated by Russia? So one is basically concept of self-defense actually, the necessity and the proportionality, because the killing of the civilians and, committing the crime at a larger level, like what kind of crimes actually? See over here. International, you can say, humanitarian law violation actually. So you know very well this humanitarian law, it is one of the main topic in IS law optional. So you know very well the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, they have set up this international humanitarian law. And ultimately, this particular humanitarian law provides the, the laws of the warfare. Ladai kaise ladni hai? Laws of the warfare are being given in this humanitarian law. So this is also, you can say, we have seen, and on daily basis, you can see that there is a clear-cut violation of the laws of the warfare in Ukraine. That is one of the biggest issue. Then comes international criminal law violation. So basically, for the enforcement of the IHL, International Humanitarian Law, we have been given this agency ICC, International Criminal Court. So ultimately, what is happening? It is a clear-cut violation of Article 8 actually. In simple words, you can say it is a violation of, the intentional attack against civilian populations, and the objects consist of a war crimes actually. You cannot kill any civilian, you cannot kill any non-combatant, you cannot treat prisoners of war, in a with in a inhumane manner. You cannot kill unnecessarily, but everything is happening. Even you cannot use weapons of mass destruction. But there is a clear-cut violation of these laws, but it is not only at the end of Russia. Even Ukraine is doing the same thing. This is also one of the points. And now, international human rights law violation. Basically, we know very well that right to life and dignity cannot be taken by the government, even at any kind of, critical situation. Because Russia and Ukraine both are the party to the UDHR, to the ICCPR, to the ECHR, and to other kind of conventions as well. And even one of the biggest convention is basically Genocide Convention, 1948. Russia and Ukraine are signatory to the Genocide Convention, 1948. And the main purpose of Ukraine going before ICJ is basically this Genocide Convention. Because under Genocide Convention, it has been given that this matter of genocide can be brought before ICJ. And that is the reason Ukraine is claiming that Russia is committing crimes of genocide and ICJ has the jurisdiction. But for the other topics, ICJ doesn't have jurisdiction upon such matters, because state has to accept the, you can say, the jurisdiction of ICJ. They have to claim actually, they have to declare. But Russia has, not now under the ambit of ICJ, but through Genocide Convention, Russia is under the ambit of ICJ, but only for genocide only. And then India's position. I have categorically mentioned over here in the past what is the stand of Russia actually. Oh, sorry, what is the stand of India actually. So the stand of India, that, the statement given by the government at the, many instances, that respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. And obviously, government has called for the immediate cessation of the violence and hostilities. Now, I will come to the main point actually, because I have just mentioned the few kind of, the resolutions presented in UN General Assembly, and whereby India has remained absent, and in a few of the, resolutions where the India has given the vote against Russia as well. I have just mentioned those resolutions over here. You can have a look on this. And now, last and final point, way forward actually, the conclusion actually, dialogue is the only way. Dialogue. Because historically we have seen the conflicts have ended either with the comprehensive victories or prolonged stalemates. But even history also tells us that resolutions for even the most vexed conflicts can be arrived at through dialogue. So dialogue is the only option. And how dialogue can happen? Now this is the conclusion actually. This is the main point actually, which I just want to highlight over here. The only solution is India's G20 presidency. It provides that a kind of platform actually, where the responsibility to initiate discussion can happen. Discussion. Actually, the main requirement is to give the platform where the discussion can happen. This is the main point of this entire discussion. Okay. And what we can see in G20, it is the world premier economic forum, which you should mention in your answers. It will need to grapple with the most serious political crisis of current times. And particularly Russia and all G7 members are part of this grouping. So what we can say now, this is one of the biggest platform for this government as well, whereby this stalemate between Russia and Ukraine can happen through the dialogue at a platform given by the India. So that actually is the main crucial agenda of this particular point. Okay. So this was all about from my side. If you have any queries, please type in the chat box. I am here to take your queries now. Thank you guys.